What up, people? Frank Lemonade here, and gaming has changed. Um, Cue the old Snake music from Metal Gear Solid 4, where he says, "More has changed." Uh, we're at, and specifically just talking about, you know, um, the type of games we play, type of games we talk about. And, I'm also just speaking from my experience as a child in like the 1990s compared to now, where I think in a lot of ways, um, purchasing a video game, purchasing action figures, or uh, a movie was a very intentional and deliberate act. In the fact that we didn't have online shopping centers and whatnot to order from the convenience of our home, and we didn't have um you know instantaneous data about a game that we may be interested in purchasing. So, you know, um, I'm not saying home internet did exist in the 90s, but it did not exist in the way that we use the internet today, where, a lot of mainstream and corporate interests use the internet to make the release of a game instantly known. And, you know, uh, if a game doesn't do well, we know when a game doesn't do well now quicker than we would like back in the 90s. Um, if a game company went under, the game company went under. We probably found out like later when a game did, when you never see a game again or a sequel to a game on shelves. You might be able to look into it later and figure out like, hey, this place went under. They're not making games anymore. But at the same time, the availability of certain games, or like a game being limited print, you know that a lot quicker now than you would in the past. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. It is just a change in how we consume information. And I will say, like, a bad thing about video games now is that um when especially this year, a lot of companies have gone out of business or like have done massive layoffs, and studios have been closed. And a lot of that, I think, at least on my end, I don't know how funding for game development works initially. I do like, understanding the elements of a business, you realize that, you know, there are people working on a project. There are people working on a project, and those people need to get paid to pay their bills, to, keep a roof over their head, and to be in a position where they are comfortable enough in their lives to continue working. Because if you're stressed out about like keeping a roof over your head, you're not always going to be doing the best work or making the best contribution, because you could be just in crisis mode and not thinking as clearly as you could be with a sustain like consistent housing and not, necessarily worried about that. So, when I say that, like, the initial funding to pay developers and publishers and all that stuff has to come from somewhere. So, definitely it seems similar enough to the movie industry where, you know, people have to get paid ahead of time, and then the release of the game, is a way to make the money that was spent on the development of the game back. So me not knowing about funding is like me thinking about, how work works and how, you have to pay employees for work, and not knowing where that initial source of funding always comes from, because that is a case by case scenario and is dependent on the company that um the game developers, publishers, whatever, do business with, and how that is set up. That is a whole thing in and of itself. So I said all this, and I've not spoken a word about Ranger X, right? This is the game that I'm playing, and this was a game that I had in my game library as a kid. I don't remember when exactly I got it. But it's a game that I have memories just playing. Because I felt it was very unique. And looking into it, this was just a game that was developed. It doesn't have like any like an IP related to it. It doesn't seem like it's not based off of a cartoon or anything. This is just like an idea that was made by a game company that was released out into the world. And it doesn't seem like, it resonated well with the audience, because look, I don't know if there's a Ranger X sequel. I don't remember ever seeing anything about a Ranger X sequel. But, I remember playing this game. I remember playing, certain titles where you don't get a sequel. And I remember just getting rid of my Sega Genesis and, selling it to Funkoland, GameStop, for credits to get PlayStation games when I first got a PlayStation 1. And, there were games that I really loved on the PlayStation 1. Shinobi 3, favorite game ever. Like, still one of my favorite games of all time. But when I parted with my Sega Genesis, I assumed that there was going to be other Shinobi titles that matched what Shinobi 3 put out into the world. And spoiler alert, there wasn't. Oh, you can talk about Shinobi for the PS2. Okay, I still don't think Shinobi for the PS2 is as good as Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master for the Sega Genesis. Oh, he crazy because he thinks the Sega Genesis game is better than the PS2 game. Yeah, damn right. Freaking Shinobi 3, it got it, like, it nailed it. It nailed it. It did everything it needed to do for a Shinobi game. It was 2D. The movement felt the movement felt smooth. Unlike Shadow Dancer, Revenge of Shinobi, and the other Shinobi game that I have on Genesis, but I can't think of it right now. I think it's just Revenge of Shinobi. But yeah, like um yeah, no, there are games that came out and just did not, you know, match what Shinobi 3 put out there. And that's fine, because that's just, there's different creative teams. There are so many things that go into making a game, and there's so many things that can go into why um some why a game seemingly peaks at a certain system, right? That's neither here nor there. But I will say, like, nowadays, due to the instantaneous nature of like spreading data, spreading information, not spreading data, because that, you know, that could give people negative connotations. They could think I'm talking about data harvesting and whatnot. It's not what I'm talking about. But how companies, they make announcements online, they send you emails, and you get all this information about games that come out, right? And the big thing is how a lot of games, especially like AAA games or whatever, make these different editions at different price points. So instead of getting one experience at $70, you have like an experience that you could get for $70, an experience that you could get for $90, and potentially as an experience that you get if you spend like $100+. And games nowadays, they're doing like season pass things where it's like, hey, we're going to give you this data in the future. If you pay this lump sum now, you'll instantaneously have access to it, and you won't have to pay a fee in the future to access it. So it's appealing, right? Because when DLC is made for games now, it's like $15, and you spent like $60 on a game, so you want to spend like $15 for one thing, and then another $15 for another thing if they decide to make it later. So it does give the consumer the illusion of a deal, but at the same time, in some cases, it's just chopping up what could potentially be packaged in the game from day one and being like, hey, well, in order to get all this, we need like, $170, $180, and I feel like that is kind of like the idea of like a game company going under, where it's trying to save itself from financial insolvents by generating additional income on top of the units that are sold. But at the same time, I feel like in a greater instance, like the initial price point of games nowadays is putting people off and making people more selective of the games that they buy. So people are buying less games right now, due to the current economic situation of the world and personal economic situations and whatnot. And game companies are now making the choice to put additional pressure on the consumer, to keep their projects going. And it sucks. It sucks. It's a shitty situation. I don't have a solution to it. I just wanted to rant about it. Anyway, I've been Crack Lemonade. I'm going to make a video in the future about something else at some point, and I'll catch you then.